In 1434, one family seized control of the most powerful city in Europe, not through war, not through conquest, but through something far more dangerous: money. They were bankers, money lenders, merchants who dealt in wool and silk. They had no royal blood, no ancient title, no army, but within 3 generations they would crown popes, marry into every royal house in Europe, and rule Florence as uncrowned kings for nearly 300 years. This is the story of the Medici, a bloodline that transformed from humble wool traders into one of the most powerful dynasties in human history. A family that financed the Renaissance itself. That gave us Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, Botticelli, Galileo, but their empire was built on secrets, manipulation, and blood. They were poisoned, assassinated, betrayed by their own blood, and when the last Medici died in 1743, their 346-year reign ended not with violence, but with silence. This is the Medici bloodline, bankers who became kings. To understand the Medici, you must first understand Florence. By the year 1400, Florence was already one of the wealthiest cities in the world. But it wasn't built on conquest or land. It was built on something revolutionary: capitalism. Florence controlled Europe's textile industry. Wool from England was shipped to Florence, where it was transformed into luxury cloth and sold across the continent at enormous profit. The city had created its own currency, the florin, a gold coin so reliable that it became the standard currency from London to Constantinople. But the real innovation was banking. Florence had perfected the art of credit, loans, and international finance. Money could now move across Europe not in heavy chests of gold, but through letters of credit, pieces of paper that represented wealth. By 1400, Florentine banks had branches in every major European city. They financed kings, they funded wars, they controlled the flow of money itself. And the families who controlled these banks became more powerful than princes. The Bardi family, the Peruzzi family, the Strozzi, the Albizzi, and one other family still relatively unknown, the Medici. Giovanni di Bicci de' Medici was born in 1360 into a family of modest means. The Medici name went back generations in Florence, but they had never been among the city's elite. They were small-time money lenders, cloth merchants, respectable but forgettable. Giovanni's early life was spent working in his uncle's small banking operation. He learned the trade from the ground up, how to assess risk, how to read character, how to make money work for you. But Giovanni saw something others missed. The Catholic Church was the wealthiest institution in Europe. Tithes, donations, and taxes flowed into Rome from every corner of Christendom, millions of florins every year. But the Church had a problem. They needed bankers to manage this vast flow of money, to transfer funds across Europe, to convert currencies. And here was the opportunity. Most bankers didn't want to work with the Church. Why? Because the Church condemned usury, charging interest on loans. It was considered a sin. Most Christian bankers avoided church business to protect their immortal souls. But Giovanni was pragmatic. In 1397, at age 37, Giovanni founded the Medici Bank with one revolutionary strategy. He would become the Pope's personal banker. He offered the Church something no one else would: discretion, efficiency, and most importantly, favorable terms that didn't technically violate usury laws. Instead of charging interest, he charged fees for currency exchange and money transfers. The arrangement was brilliant. The Church got a reliable banker. Giovanni got exclusive access to the largest flow of money in Europe. Within 10 years, the Medici Bank had branches in every major European city: Rome, Venice, Geneva, Bruges, London, even as far as Constantinople. Giovanni wasn't just managing the Pope's money. He was loaning to kings, financing merchant expeditions, funding entire governments. By 1420, the Medici Bank was generating profits of over 150,000 florins a year, equivalent to tens of millions of dollars today. But Giovanni understood something crucial. In Florence, flaunting wealth was dangerous. While other banking families built palaces and lived like princes, Giovanni lived modestly. He dressed simply. He avoided politics. He once told his son Cosimo, "Stay out of the public eye. Let others seek fame. We will seek power, molto pochini vi." When Giovanni died in 1429, he left behind more than a fortune. He left behind a network, a reputation, and 2 sons trained in the art of financial warfare. The elder son, Cosimo, would take that foundation and build an empire that would last 3 centuries. But first, he would have to survive. Cosimo de' Medici inherited his father's bank at age 40. He was everything Giovanni had trained him to be: brilliant with numbers, patient, discreet. But Cosimo had one quality his father lacked: ambition. Florence in 1430 was a republic, at least in name. The real power belonged to the guilds and wealthy merchant families who controlled the government behind the scenes. The most powerful family was the Albizzi, led by Rinaldo degli Albizzi, a man who saw the Medici as dangerous upstarts. Cosimo understood that money alone wasn't enough. He needed political power, so he began doing something revolutionary. He loaned money to Florence's poor and middle classes at favorable rates. He paid for public works, aqueducts, hospitals, churches. He financed small businesses. He created jobs. Within a few years, Cosimo had become the most popular man in Florence among the common people, and that terrified the Albizzi. In September 1433, Rinaldo degli Albizzi made his move. Cosimo was arrested on fabricated charges of treason and tyranny. The accusation was absurd. Cosimo held no political office, but in Florence, accusations were often enough. He was locked in a cell at the top of the Palazzo Vecchio. For days he waited, not knowing if he would be executed or exiled. Some say Cosimo feared poison so much that he refused to eat. Others say he was already planning his return. The truth is, Cosimo was negotiating. He bribed the prison guards, he sent secret messages to his allies, and most importantly, he promised his jailer, the Gonfalonier, a massive loan if he spared his life. The sentence came down: exile, not execution. Cosimo was banished from Florence for 10 years. He was sent to Venice. Most men would have been broken by this. Cosimo wasn't most men. From Venice, Cosimo activated his greatest weapon, his network. He wrote to every branch of the Medici Bank, to every political ally, to every debtor. He called in loans, he cut off credit, he moved money. Within months, Florence's economy was collapsing. The Albizzi government, now in power, couldn't pay its soldiers, couldn't fund public works, couldn't even pay its own debts. The people of Florence, who had loved Cosimo, began to riot. They demanded his return. 1 year after his exile, just 1 year, the Albizzi government fell. On October 6, 1434, Cosimo de' Medici returned to Florence, not as a criminal, not as an exile, as its uncrowned king. Cosimo never held official office, he never wore a crown, he never declared himself ruler, but for the next 30 years nothing happened in Florence without Cosimo's approval. His first act: exile the Albizzi family forever. The age of Medici supremacy had begun. Under Cosimo, Florence became the most beautiful city in the world. In 1444, Cosimo commissioned architect Michelangelo to build the Palazzo Medici, a fortress palace that would become the family's headquarters. But it wasn't just about power, it was about legacy. Cosimo believed that true immortality came not from armies or wealth, but from art and knowledge. He spent a fortune, some estimate over 600,000 florins, funding artists, architects, and scholars. He became the primary patron of Donatello, the greatest sculptor of the age. Donatello's Bronze David, the first freestanding nude statue since ancient Rome, was commissioned by Cosimo. Cosimo sent agents across Europe and the Middle East to collect ancient Greek and Roman texts that had been lost for 1,000 years. He founded the Medici Library, the first public library in Europe, filled with works by Plato, Aristotle, and Homer, newly translated from Greek into Latin. He established the Platonic Academy, where humanist scholars studied classical philosophy and debated the great questions of existence. Under Cosimo's patronage, Florence became the epicenter of a cultural revolution, the Renaissance. But this golden age had a foundation built on manipulation and control. Cosimo controlled Florence through a system of patronage and debt. He manipulated tax assessments to ruin rival families. He placed his allies in key government positions. He used the Medici Bank as a weapon, offering loans to allies, denying credit to enemies. Those who opposed him found themselves mysteriously bankrupt, exiled, or worse. Cosimo never needed violence. He controlled Florence through money, favors, and fear. When Cosimo died in 1464 at age 75, the Florentine government awarded him a title no private citizen had ever received: Pater Patriae, Father of the Fatherland. But the title came with a burden. His son Piero would inherit not just wealth, but the impossible task of maintaining Cosimo's empire. A 20-year-old named Lorenzo de Medici inherits control of Florence. His grandfather Cosimo had built an empire. His father Piero, weak and sickly, had barely held it together for 5 years before dying. Now it fell to Lorenzo. But Lorenzo was different. Where Cosimo had been cautious and hidden, Lorenzo was bold and visible. He was a poet, a philosopher, an athlete who won jousting tournaments. He wrote love sonnets that are still studied today. He debated philosophy with the greatest minds of the age. In 1489, a teenage sculptor named Michelangelo Buonarroti was brought to Lorenzo's attention. Lorenzo invited the boy to live in the Medici palace, treating him like a son. He funded Leonardo da Vinci, commissioned Botticelli, supported dozens of other masters. Under Lorenzo, Florence reached the peak of the Renaissance, but Lorenzo had enemies. In Rome, Pope Sixtus IV despised the Medici. Why? Because Lorenzo had refused to finance the Pope's wars of expansion in Italy. The Medici Bank, for generations, the Pope's personal bank, had said no to the Vicar of Christ. Sixtus found willing allies in the Pazzi family, Florence's second most powerful banking family, who had long been overshadowed by the Medici. Francesco de' Pazzi was eaten alive by jealousy and ambition. The plan was elegant in its brutality: assassinate Lorenzo and his brother Giuliano simultaneously, in public, during the most sacred moment of Easter Mass. The Pope himself gave his blessing, though he later claimed he had only approved removing the Medici, not murdering them. April 26, 1478, Easter Sunday, the Florence Cathedral, the Duomo, was packed with thousands of worshippers. Lorenzo and Giuliano de' Medici arrived together, dressed in their finest clothes. Giuliano was late. He had been suffering from a leg injury. Francesco de' Pazzi had gone to escort him personally, playfully slapping him on the back to confirm he wore no armor beneath his robes. The Mass proceeded. The moment of consecration approached, when the priest raises the host and every head bows in prayer. The signal: Francesco de' Pazzi and his accomplice Bernardo Bandini struck Giuliano. 19 times they stabbed him. Giuliano collapsed on the marble floor of the cathedral, blood pooling beneath him. Lorenzo's assassin struck, but only managed to wound Lorenzo's neck. Lorenzo's friends, including the artist Angelo Poliziano, formed a protective circle and dragged him toward the sacristy, unsure if the blade had been poisoned. The cathedral erupted into chaos, thousands of people screaming, fleeing. In the sacristy, Lorenzo learned the truth. His brother was dead, and Florence was now in the hands of his enemies. Or so the conspirators thought, but the Pazzi had miscalculated catastrophically. The people of Florence loved the Medici. Within an hour, armed citizens were hunting down the conspirators. Francesco de' Pazzi was captured as he tried to flee. Stripped naked and beaten by the mob, he was dragged to the Palazzo Vecchio and hanged from the windows alongside the other conspirators. Even the Archbishop of Pisa, who had been part of the plot, was hanged in his ecclesiastical robes. By nightfall, dozens of conspirators and their families were dead. Lorenzo stood at the window of the Palazzo Medici, looking out over his city. His brother was dead, his own neck was bandaged, the cathedral floor was still stained with blood. The Pazzi Conspiracy had failed, but it changed Lorenzo forever. The poet prince became the Iron Ruler. Lorenzo established a network of spies and informants throughout Florence. Anyone suspected of disloyalty simply disappeared. The Magnificent had become the Merciless. Pope Sixtus IV, enraged by the conspiracy's failure, excommunicated Lorenzo and declared war on Florence. In a move of stunning boldness, Lorenzo traveled alone to Naples, into the court of King Ferdinand, Florence's enemy, and personally negotiated a peace. He returned 3 months later, having secured peace and saved Florence. He was now more than a banker, more than a patron. He was Florence's savior, its prince in all but name. By the early 1500s, the Medici had achieved something no banking family had ever done before. They controlled the Catholic Church itself. March 9th, 1513, Giovanni de Medici, Lorenzo's second son, was elected Pope Leo X at age 37. His coronation was the most expensive in papal history. The streets of Rome were decorated with triumphal arches. Gold was literally thrown to the crowds. Leo famously declared, "God has given us the papacy. Let us enjoy it." And enjoy it he did. He threw extravagant banquets featuring exotic animals, theatrical performances, and hundreds of guests. He commissioned Raphael to paint the papal apartments. He ordered Michelangelo to continue work on St. Peter's Basilica, a project that would cost more than any building in human history up to that point. There was just one problem. The Catholic Church was running out of money. Within 3 years of becoming Pope, Leo had spent the entire papal treasury, years of accumulated wealth, gone. He needed money, desperately. His solution was both ingenious and catastrophic. He would sell salvation. Leo dramatically expanded the sale of indulgences, certificates that supposedly reduced time in purgatory for sins committed. Buy one for yourself, buy one for your dead grandmother. The more you paid, the more sins were forgiven. In Germany, a monk named Johann Tetzel became infamous for his sales pitch. When a coin in the coffer rings, a soul from purgatory springs. The money poured in, millions of florins from across Christendom, but one German monk was watching with growing horror. His name was Martin Luther. On October 31st, 1517, Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the door of the castle church in Wittenberg. Point by point, he tore apart the theology of indulgences. He attacked the Pope's authority. He questioned the entire structure of the Catholic Church. Thanks to the printing press, a recent invention, Luther's ideas spread like wildfire. Within years, entire regions of Europe had broken away from Rome. The Protestant Reformation had begun, and it would tear Europe apart for the next century. Pope Leo X died in 1521, still not comprehending the catastrophe he had unleashed. The Medici Pope had inadvertently destroyed the religious unity of Christendom, all because he needed money to fund his lavish lifestyle and finish his grandfather's artistic legacy. The irony is bitter. St. Peter's Basilica, one of the most beautiful buildings ever created, was paid for by an act that shattered Christianity forever. By the 1520s, the Medici bloodline was beginning to fracture. Lorenzo the Magnificent had died in 1492 at just 43 years old. His son Piero proved incompetent and was exiled within 2 years. In 1523, another Medici became Pope, Clement VII, Lorenzo's illegitimate nephew. But Clement was no Leo. He was indecisive, politically inept, unable to navigate the dangerous waters of European politics. Europe was now dominated by two superpowers. The Holy Roman Emperor Charles V controlled Spain, Germany, and much of Italy. King Francis I of France controlled the north. Italy was their battleground, and Pope Clement kept switching sides, betraying first the emperor, then the French, then the emperor again. Charles V had enough. On May 6, 1527, an army of German and Spanish troops, including Lutheran soldiers who despised the Pope, arrived at the walls of Rome. What followed was one of the most horrific events of the Renaissance. For 8 days, Rome was sacked, churches were destroyed, palaces burned, priceless art was vandalized, vandalized or stolen. 8,000 people died. Pope Clement VII barely escaped, fleeing through a secret passage to Castel Sant'Angelo, a fortress on the Tiber River. He remained trapped there for 7 months, essentially a prisoner, while Rome burned. The sack of Rome destroyed the Medici's reputation as untouchable. If even the Pope, a Medici Pope, could be humiliated this way, then the Medici were no longer invincible. In Florence, the people saw their chance. While the Pope was imprisoned, they revolted and expelled the Medici again. For 3 years, Florence was free, the last time it would be a true republic. But in 1530, Emperor Charles V, having made peace with the Pope, sent an army to besiege Florence. The siege lasted 11 months. Food ran out, disease spread, thousands starved. On August 12, 1530, Florence surrendered. The Medici returned, but this time they didn't pretend to be citizens. Alessandro de' Medici was made Duke of Florence by imperial decree. For the first time, the Medici were no longer bankers posing as private citizens. They were official rulers. But Alessandro was a disaster. He was brutal, paranoid, corrupt. He executed rivals without trial. He seized property. He ruled through terror. On January 6, 1537, Alessandro was murdered by his own cousin Lorenzo de' Medici in a plot worthy of Shakespeare. The Medici line continued through a distant branch, Cosimo I, great-great-grandson of Lorenzo the Magnificent's brother. Cosimo I would prove to be a capable, if autocratic, ruler. He would expand Medici territory to include all of Tuscany and earn the title Grand Duke in 1569. But something essential had changed. The Medici were no longer bankers who controlled politics. They were politicians who happened to be rich. The bank, once the source of their power, was in decline. For the next 150 years, the Medici ruled Tuscany as Grand Dukes. Some were capable, most were mediocre, a few were insane. The Medici bloodline was weakening. Centuries of intermarriage with other European royal families, often between cousins, had taken its toll. By the early 1700s, the Medici suffered from genetic problems that plagued many European royal houses: infertility, mental illness, physical deformities. In 1723, Giangastone de' Medici became the 7th and final Grand Duke of Tuscany. He was an alcoholic, depressed, virtually bedridden for the last years of his life. He rarely left his chambers. He had no interest in governing. He had no children. The Medici dynasty was dying with him. On July 9, 1737, Giangastone died at age 65. He was the last male Medici. His sister, Anna Maria Luisa de' Medici, was the final surviving member of the main bloodline. She was 70 years old, a widow, the last of her family. Anna Maria Luisa had watched her entire family die, her brothers, her cousins, her son, who died in infancy. She was alone, but she made one final decision that would ensure the Medici legacy lived forever. In 1737, she signed the Patto di Famiglia, the family pact. It was an extraordinary document. Every painting, every sculpture, every book, every treasure the Medici had collected over 300 years, every single work of art they owned, would remain in Florence forever. They could never be sold, never removed, never taken to another country. They belonged to the people of Florence, to humanity. The Uffizi Gallery, the Pitti Palace, the Medici Library, Michelangelo's David, Botticelli's Birth of Venus, countless masterpieces by Raphael, Titian, Caravaggio, and hundreds of other artists. All of it was given to the world. Anna Maria Luisa de' Medici died on February 18, 1743, at age 75. With her death, the Medici bloodline ended. 346 years after Giovanni di Bicci founded the Medici Bank, the dynasty was extinct. The Medici were never kings, they were never emperors, but they were more powerful than both. They proved that money, not armies, controls the world. For 3.5 centuries, one family shaped Western civilization. They gave us the Renaissance. They gave us art that defines humanity. But they also showed us the cost of power, betrayal, assassination, corruption. Every empire has a price. The Medici paid it in blood, yet their legacy endures. Walk through Florence today and you walk through their world. The Duomo, the Uffizi, the Palazzo Vecchio, the bridges, the libraries, the churches, all built with Medici money, all filled with Medici art. When you stand before Michelangelo's David, you're looking at Lorenzo's investment. When you gaze at the Sistine Chapel, you're seeing a Medici Pope's ambition. When you study Renaissance philosophy, you're reading books the Medici saved from oblivion. The Medici bloodline may have ended in 1743, but their empire, it will last forever. Power fades, art endures. This has been Bloodline Chronicles.